One of the cornerstones, if not the cornerstone, of the Western world today, and for some centuries really, is the concept of liberty, of freedom. It is assumed that liberty is good. It is assumed it is good to be free, and rights are desired more than absolutely anything. There is not a group of people or a body out there in the West that is not arguing for rights, and we have to free people. Now, let's for a moment put aside the very obvious hypocrisies and discrepancies about that in our society, because very obviously there is an awful lot of very totalitarian control that goes on. Let's put that aside for one moment and let's look at this from a much more personal perspective. It is normally better in life to couch yourself from the perspective of what is virtuous rather than what is sinful. Couching yourself from the perspective of virtue will mean applying limitations to yourself, whereas doing it from the perspective of vice will mean applying liberties to yourself. In a sense, this was the message of the novel Crime and Punishment. Liberties are far more connected to evil, to bad people and to bad actors than we think or can even countenance these days. Everybody really does today claim, think, or at least claim to think, that liberty is the source of all good and limitation of all evil. Every political party, every charity, every do-gooder is obsessed with unleashing your potential, right, and freeing us from our struggles. And I suggest that all they are really doing in most cases is opening doors for themselves. Maybe I don't want to release my potential. How did that work for Adolf Hitler? Maybe I don't want to be liberated from my struggles, since, at least in my life, it's my struggles that have taught me much more than my trifles, It's an easy message to sell, the concept of liberty, because it appeals to the worst part of us, right? It appeals to the part of us that simply wants to indulge ourselves. It appeals to our ego and to our will, our ability to just do stuff, right? It is a message that has been started to have been taught kind of since the days of Cromwell. He was obviously a very authoritarian figure. But that's when the bourgeoisie really start to emerge, and to gain power. And they are the transporters of the idea of liberty for the most part, because they want to take power from the aristocrats, right? So they want to sell the idea of liberty. But I said I wouldn't get into that side of things in this video. The point is that it is the creep of boundless liberty, or rather, at least the promise of it, that is easy to sell these days. I know that to suggest this, to question liberty, and to suggest we might want to have limitations, is extremely dangerous, as the comments usually end up saying. They assert that people that say this are very dangerous people, and they also often say things like, careful what you wish for, when limitations are applied. Indeed, limitations can be bad. Absolutely they can. Although, as hopefully I'll demonstrate momentarily, limitations are bad precisely when there is a person in your society or a group of people who have too much liberty. Let's dig a little deeper into that. The society we have at the moment is a liberal one, and it's more totalitarian than any point in history. Fact, just pure fact, it is. It is more controlling. It has the ability to be much more controlling. You are watched and controlled in inhuman ways that would have never been possible and never been acceptable in national history. In fact, there is nobody who is more obsessed with liberty than the dictator, an absolute ruler. Stalin absolutely loved liberty. he couldn't get enough of liberty, loved it, more than anyone and more than anything. And that is precisely why he became dictator, so that he could have absolute liberty to do what he wanted, when he wanted, and how he wanted. Too much of a good thing, to say the least. But secondly, I am not suggesting that we have an arbitrary limit on liberties, nor that they should be applied from the state or whatever. Certainly some should, but I think the vast majority of limitations should be self-imposed, and that furthermore, that's a necessity for anybody who wants to be a good or successful person. The reality of history is that the various liberation movements that have been at the core of social development since the early modern period are in each and every case nothing more than a matter of crude democratic politics. In short, you have to promise people things they don't have, that they will have if you get into power, and hence you offer them new liberties. The result of this today is entirely evident, because people are now looking for and being offered the next level of radicalized liberty, and that is liberation from truth. The truths of race, the truths of sex, of gender, of history, of science, of sound economics, of being a fair and decent society. I always have a little hypothesis that if you think about the French and how they're often considered as rude, which in a lot of cases isn't actually really true, but to roll with it, think about the French political model, its socialist model, and it's around the idea that the state has the responsibility and the people are all liberated because of that. Well, maybe that's why they're rude, because they don't think of being responsible. It's just, what I want to do. And you might also compare that with, for example, people often say, or at least they said, I don't know if things are changing now, but that people in the southern states of the United States tended to be more polite, and you might consider they have had a very opposite model of society where the state had very little responsibility and people had a lot of responsibility themselves. In other words, you didn't have that right just to do what you want. Won't read too much into this, but it's an idea. It's a possibility. And that brings me to my point that another word for a limitation is a responsibility. People think that liberties lead to responsibility, but this is false. It is limitations that lead to it. Think of a person who becomes prime minister. If they think that their position is one of liberty, then it's basically about their will and what they can do. It's not about responsibility. But if they think of their position as one of service, then it is about responsibility. The late Queen Elizabeth II was perhaps the best example we have of limitations and responsibility. She saw her role as one of service to country, to her institution, to God, and that placed more limitations on her personal life than I think any of us will ever know. Oh, and she also just so happens to be a lot of people's pick for the model of a decent, even noble person. So, just saying. So, if we flip that on its head, imagine trying to live a life without limits, with ultimate freedom. You would be crippled or dead or arrested in what? Depends where you are. Could be an hour, half an hour, could be 1 minute. You'll be walking off cliffs. You'll be stealing, taking people's stuff, drowning yourself in booze, because it's all freedom. Life is a matter of limits. It is. For the same reason that the main character in Crime and Punishment had to find out, which is that you and me and everybody on this planet is very small, and it is a very big world and an even bigger universe, and our liberties do not encroach upon everything else. we have to accept many more limitations than we do liberties. And this is why liberties are connected to ego and will, to, the idea that I want to do this, I will do this. It's Promethean, right? Shaking your fist at God. Now, shaking your fist is very good if what you're shaking it at is not God or not nature, not some, dare I say, cosmic truth, but is simply a corrupt leadership. That is good, but not at the ultimate. And unfortunately, too many of us now think that we should be liberated from everything. So the next time somebody tries to get you to vote for them, or to give you your cash to them on the basis that they will free you, tell them that the only freedom you want is the freedom to apply limitations to yourself, to take on responsibility and better yourself. And tell them that the one limitation you do not want is the inability to apply limitations to yourself.